Senator Rubio, thanks so much for being with us. Here we are in the wake of the Paris attacks. San Bernardino just happened this week. We found out that the wife of one of the female jihadists was someone who put on Facebook that she was and pledged her allegiance to ISIS, apparently a connection with Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. And yet this week you voted to allow the large-scale continuation of Muslim immigration from countries with jihadist movements. Why?
That's not accurate. That's not accurate. There was an amendment I think you're referring to. The problem with and it was too broad. It didn't just do what you just pointed out. It actually ended the entire visa waiver program. So, for example, a German tourist was on his way to Disney World for Christmas with their families. They wouldn't be able to come. If a business person was on their way here to conduct a deal in New York Monday morning, their visa would have been canceled. We don't have to go that far. We just need to focus on those countries that are producing jihadists.
All right.
And the amendment went much broader than that, and that's why very few people voted for it.
All right, and I understand that, but don't we have to take particular steps now, given the fact that ISIS has said openly we're going to recruit among the Syrian refugees, and now we know that this woman has a Pakistani connection, he went to Saudi Arabia, K-1 visas for fiancés. Isn't it time for us to close the door?
Well, it's a time for us to close the door on people that are trying to come in here to do harm. You talked about the different visas. The primary visa the terrorists try to use to get into the U.S. are either some of these business visas, believe it or not, or the student visas. We've known that for a fact. And then another one that poses a growing threat is the refugee visas. She didn't come under any of those. She came under a spouse visa, which is an additional risk factor now, apparently. So we need to be more careful about allowing people in from these countries that are producing terrorism. But here's the broader point that I've been making now for weeks. It isn't that America doesn't want to accept refugees, is that we cannot fully vet people. This is an example of that. There was nothing, we could have vetted her for months. Nothing would have turned up on her because she had never been radicalized until she got here and then conducted and
well,
obviously
we don't know that to be the case, Senator.
And so my point is it becomes almost impossible to vet people, and that's why we do need to limit the number of people coming.
But Senator, you say that she wasn't radicalized until she got here. We don't know that to be the case, do we?
Well, she wouldn't have wound up in any database. She wasn't in any of the databases that we could have compared her to. The point I'm trying to make is that that's why I argue with people who say, well, we're going to vet the refugees. And I'm saying it doesn't matter how long or how often you vet them. It's not going to be enough. Because you're not going to be able to turn up things on people that have been radicalized or have never wound up on a database before. These databases are not sufficient. You won't find a lot of the people that are coming here to do terrorism. They're not going to wind up on any database.
Senator,
so that's why we have to be even more additional.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yes.
I mean, as a prosecutor, I mean, you've got to have a database. You've got to have something to compare. So you say that you're very careful, and we need to be more careful, but we don't know how to be more careful. Doesn't it take time? Isn't there time for a pause so that we can get all of our ducks in place before people come in who we don't know?
Well, that's what the bill in the House that passed did, and that's what we should pass in the Senate. It does pause these programs, especially when they come from countries that have been producing people. But the broader problem now that we have with this issue of radical jihadists is they're not just coming from the Middle East anymore. They could very easily be citizens of a European country and are entering on a visa waiver. They could very easily be, the other threat we have is homegrown violent extremists. This man that was involved in this attack was a U.S. citizen born in the United States. And so that's another risk that it's actually the hardest one of all to deal with because he had no markers of radicalization, apparently, until it was too late. And so my point is this is a threat we have never faced before. It requires new measures and new vigilance that will make people uncomfortable in some cases, but we don't have a choice.
Well, let me ask you this, Senator. You know, when we look at what happened with the Oklahoma individual who sliced the throat of that woman, and they said it was workplace violence, apparently his mosque was a mosque where some of this, you know, kind of jihadi discussion was being had, and yet nothing's been done. No one would go into a mosque and close it unless they had probable cause. But if we're not infiltrating, if we're not profiling, then how are we going to know?
Well, that's exactly right. But here's the broader issue with what you've just said, and that is they even refuse to categorize these things as acts of terrorism. And one of the reasons why is because it runs counter to the narrative the president's been putting out. The narrative he's been putting out is that ISIS is being contained, that the terrorism is under control, that we don't have an issue to worry about here. It goes back to their claim that bin Laden was dead and Al-Qaeda was on the run. So every time one of these things happens, it runs counter to the political narrative. It's the same reason why they denied Benghazi was a terrorist attack, initially anyway.
All right. Senator Rubio, thanks so much for being with us on Justice.